Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Contact Lost, where we're going to be doing the WTC Studio debriefing here with our special guest, Nathan StatsDad of the PhD Variety.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Nathan. Good to have you once again on the show. And as always, a massive thank you to our sponsors. That is the Contact Lost ones in this case, so Weyland-Yutani and the Army Painter, and our community of patrons and the YouTube members. Thanks, everybody. You're making all of this possible. So, Nathan, how did you get home all right from the event?
So, actually, strangely enough, yes. For the most part, my travel home was uncursed. So I was going with the Team Canada team in one of the shuttles that they had ordered. One of the shuttles didn't show up, but we were able to get an Uber to the airport pretty quickly, which was basically the same thing. So I sat at the airport for a while and managed to find my two friends from Contactlost, strangely enough, just standing off to the side. It was very funny just to kind of reconnect, as if I can ever escape, apparently. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, then the flights home were smooth. We got to London, and then I went from London back to Chicago. The only real problem was that I got into the longest customs line I've ever seen in the Chicago airport before. It was like maybe a kilometer long. It was horrific. It was all the way back to the escalators for the other side of the international terminal for people to come down from. It was backed up all the way to the escalators there. So it was quite wild. So that took like an hour and a half, which was still somehow faster than customs in Brussels, despite the line being horrendously longer. So yeah, mostly fine. Other than like small things. Nothing quite as cursed as on the way to Europe, where a plane getting canceled shifted all my travel all around and I got to run around in circles. How about you, Joker? How was yours and Pablito's travel back to Poland?
Well, it was also better than the way to Belgium, although the security in Belgium is very much more thorough than our local airport in Gdańsk. And we spent about like 30 minutes going through our bags, talking about what this is, what that is, what's it for, what's that for, etc., etc. Because obviously, if you're carrying like very short and thin, but still made of steel little wires, wired thingy cables, stuff to put the soft boxes up. I think you've seen it when we were doing the studio.
Yep.
Well, that could potentially be obviously used as a weapon, even if it's at the very bottom of your bag, stashed under dirty laundry and stuff like that. But well, that was that. Yeah, but other than that, the flight went real smooth. We were just way too early at the airport.
Same. Although I ran into all sorts of folks actually after getting through customs at the Brussels airport as well, which was kind of funny. No matter where I went in that airport, I was running into somebody I knew at that point.
Too many 40k nerds traveling.
Way too many 40k nerds, it's true.
But what do you think of the event? The event itself?
I continue to think that WTC and War Masters are the best Warhammer 40k events that take place in the entire world. War Masters is a great event. It's run very smoothly and gives you an opportunity to play against like people from all over, essentially. Even though I did horrifically, which is fine. We can talk about that at a different point. I still think that the people I met and the sportsmanship that was displayed and the stories I was getting from people who were going to their first War Masters into their first WTC kind of really cemented the like camaraderie and like the sportsmanship and the high level of play that you get to experience at War Masters and at WTC, which are things that you don't get at normal events, right? So
yeah,
I went 0-3 at War Masters, to be clear, using Team Canada's Hollowed Martyrs list. And then I decided to take a day in Mechlin for the second day. I was like, you know what? I've had enough of trying to swim in this shark tank without having practiced any swimming whatsoever. And so instead of trying to continue swimming in the Shark Tank, I was like, I'm just going to go do some traveling things. And so Seth, who was doing the War Games live stream, also dropped for the second day after going 0-3. So we together, as giant loser Americans, decided to explore Mechlin instead on day 2. And to be clear, a bunch of people later gave me a bunch of shit for picking one of the hardest armies to play from the Sisters roster, because I was playing Hollowed Martyr Sisters. And they were like, I'm not surprised you went 0-3 with no practice, Nathan. That list requires you to actually think your way through things and like require you to know what different units and stuff can do that are in your army and stuff like that, and requires some finesse and skill to play. And when you don't practice, you get to have neither finesse nor skill while doing so. Yeah. WTC went great. I didn't hear of any problems. All the teams seem to be in really good spirits as usual. On like every day, the jerseys are changing from person to person. And so inevitably you just look around and you just see people exchanging jerseys or exchanging drinks. Like the most common thing that I think teams bring with each other to like break the ice with their opponents is some kind of alcohol from the country that they're in. So I'm wearing Team Mexico's jersey today, which I got from Noah, one of the mercs on their team. And they were apparently giving people bottles of tequila to share every round. So sometimes all it takes to smooth any international quibbles is, a bottle of liquor over 8 games of 40K.
100%, right? You don't need to tell that to an Eastern European.
Look, I'm surprised you guys ever roll dice and it's not just who can drink the most, and then whoever drinks the most without passing out wins the game. And then you just repeat that for 6 rounds or so.
Yeah, if there was 1 round per day, I think that would be doable, but 2 rounds, it's a bit rough, unless you have 2 squads of people, then maybe.
We're gonna have to change tactics. They say like there's boxing 40K, so like boxing chess is where you play like a game of chess and then box for 30 seconds, like you do a round of boxing and then you play another game of chess, basically. It's like 30 seconds of chess and then 30 seconds of boxing, something like that. So you could do that for 40K. At the end of every turn, every battle round, you'd have 30 seconds of boxing for 40K, or in this case, after every battle round, somebody takes a shot and then you just see who's standing at the end of it and can complete their game of 40K.
Yeah, I mean, the boxing thing, what if the contestants are not in the same weight category? What happens then? Or nobody cares?
It's very sad and unfortunate. Maybe you should only pick... I mean, I guess Team Norway would win every year from now to the foreseeable future. Or maybe Team New Zealand, who brought like an entire rugby team equivalent of people.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to take pairings a little bit differently, right?
You're pairing by weight class as well as by faction. You need somebody to survive fighting potentially a 6'6" Norwegian player.
Exactly. But Nathan, what do you think of the results? Like, and was the event tighter than you thought it would be, or than it was last year?
It definitely felt tighter than last year. By the time we hit the last round last year, it felt pretty certain what was going to happen, aside from like a few things at the top of the podium, basically. But it felt a lot clearer what was going on and like who had the true advantage going into the last round, because it felt like at that point that Poland really just had complete control of its own fate at that point in last year's event. And whereas at this point in this year's event, France controlled its own fate, but there were like a lot of aspects that could alter how that worked, and France was playing into another top tier team. So there was a lot of different things that could happen and change and could alter the whole podium very easily. Although once you dropped out of like the top 10 teams by placement at that point, none of the other stuff outside of the top 10 really mattered for what was going on. I don't think anybody is surprised by who was in the top 5 this year. I know that I was right from the beginning of WTC and before WTC about who I picked to win, because France ended up winning, and so I was right, and that's all I wanted in life.
Good for you.
I know. Every now and then I'm going to be right, bud. Might as well be right this one time. And now I can milk it for the next 20 years by saying I was the person who called that shot real early.
Yeah, you just gotta be right the one time when it matters, right? And then whatever.
Exactly. And then now I can, just sit on my laurels for the rest of time,
Eternity.
basically.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Sounds good. Yeah.
So yeah, we had, I think the real surprises though are kind of more on second and third place is what we saw. Spain ended up in second place.
Sort of, yeah.
And then that was more of an outside chance, I think, more than anything else because of the way that their record worked out because they had like several draws.
They've had two. They've
Yeah,
had
and
two.
so they
Yeah.
needed to beat Sweden. They couldn't draw with Sweden. They needed to beat Sweden in order to get a podium position potentially. And then they needed like several other things to happen at the top of it in order for things to not change too much. But Spain taking second was also great. All credit to Zandre and the team that he put together for pulling that off. And then in third place, we had Poland because Poland is always in every conversation no matter what. I wouldn't be surprised to see Poland just have a podium spot every year, just automatically. You just always put it there. Just put Poland in the podium. Just give them a slot and just say Poland's going to end up in 1, 2, or 3. It doesn't matter which one. And you'll probably be right more often than you're wrong. I can't remember who got fourth place though.
It was Sweden. I think the most unlucky team, I want to say. Especially given how the games went or the first rounds for some of them, as we've heard, then you might want to call them the most unlucky team.
They definitely had a real rough first round because if you go back and you listen to the studio stream desk from that day and you listen to Zandre talk about kind of like what's going on, Zandre went into great detail about everything, by the way. So if you're interested in like pairing processes, matchups, and like analysis, Zandre covers like every single aspect of that final round with Sweden in the conversation with us in far more detail than either France or the United States did about their matchups.
I mean, in that last couple of interviews, everyone kind of showed more of the hand that they had going into the event, which was very interesting to hear. And yeah, but Zandre's was especially fun.
And then he basically told us that somebody was about to lose Magnus turn 1 to their Drukhari opponent, and that a Grey Knights player had essentially picked up a Hecaton in the Votan matchup by causing 11 mortal wounds to it and then hitting a charge with Caldrago on turn 1, essentially.
No, it was the librarian that dealt those 11 mortal wounds, I think.
Oh, that killed it. Okay. But he basically
beats very much less damage than Caldrago, so that sounds a lot more dicey than Drago would have done it.
We did end up seeing that Magnus had died when we walked over to the table after the interview ended because we were waiting to see the results of an Incubi charge, essentially, because the Incubi had made the charge, but we weren't sure if they had killed Magnus. And we did get over there, and Magnus was off the table on the side, looking sad. So the Incubi had picked up Magnus turn 1, which is a big deal, and then losing a Hecaton is also a big deal for that Votan player, which kind of just puts you on the back foot almost immediately, right? Not necessarily the place that you want to be in.
100%. I think what's interesting is that only one country from last year's podium made the podium again, and it was a much worse spot than the one they had last year.
Yeah, I mean, Poland got first last year and then got third this year, right?
Yep.
Which is worse, but I wouldn't qualify it as much worse. You're still podium. You're just not winning.
Of course. Sure. But well, if you're still on podium, then worse is second and third is much worse. There's no more options, right? You only have the 3.
Funnily enough, I'm of the opinion that I follow kind of the old joke about Olympic medal placements. The person who's in first place is so happy to be in first place. The person in second place is so sad to be in second place. The person in third place is just so happy to be there.
That they made the podium,
Yep. And so I always view the second place as being the hardest place. Although in WTC, it's not quite the same because there's like a lot more fighting to get podium positions that's involved in some of the events at like the Olympics or something like that.
Yeah, that's true, because usually maybe not usually, but quite often the team that finishes second isn't like the team that's losing a final per se, right? Because the
Correct.
competition's so tight, you have someone like jumping in from not playing the winning team, at least not in the last round.
Right.
So it is a little bit different, just like you're saying.
Then I guess I'll just round out the top 10 real quick from like a placement perspective, just so people can kind of have that recap. So in the 5th place, we have the United States, who kind of lost two big games over the course of the event, one to Poland and then the last one to France, by like pretty small margins, pretty small losses for them. I kind of kicked them off the podium, which is what they're really aiming for.
1 point.
Yep. And they're just so like their goal of taking first this year, maybe we'll have to wait until next year. We'll kind of see how that team kind of bounces back from a pretty close loss. In 6th is Germany, who also had 2 losses. They just kind of underscored the United States, and they are, I'm pretty sure that they're happy with that result. I mean, from talking to Malta, that during the interview, he's very happy with like how they were already doing. And I'm sure he's very happy with that result, because that leaves the team with a lot of room to grow. And he was talking about how it was kind of a rebuilding year for them. And a 6th place finish during a rebuilding year means that Germany's team is going to be very dangerous, probably with a little bit more experience under their belt over the next few years.
Yeah, and they've managed to recover after a rough start to the Swiss phase. So they took 2 losses first to Sweden and England, like tier 1 teams. Then they played Netherlands, so another tier 1 team, but they've managed to win that. And then Scotland in the last round, so a team aspiring to be the seed 1.
Correct.
So yeah, well done to them.
Yes,
I do think that comment is a little bit biased, but we'll let it slide.
I mean, to be fair, these are the best. My wife,
great.
My wife does pick best shirts from the giant pile that I bring home, and she did pick this one as her favorite shirt that I brought home this year. So
it's a good shirt. It was one of the better ones.
And I was very glad that I got to grab one. In 7th place, we have England, who I think, and based off some conversation with them, they are quite disappointed with this result. This is worse than last year's fifth place placing.
Yep.
And it's probably a little hard because the team came in, I think, confident again this year after we interviewed them for round 0 pairings and felt really good about their preparation. And to get 2 losses and a draw is a pretty brutal result, especially when they're playing as a tier 1 team. Also, I can't remember if Italy's a seed 1 or not, actually, off the top of my head.
It's seed 2 team.
Yeah. So drawing a seed 2 team in the last round is also, I think, a little bit brutal for you as a team that kind of was aspiring to a podium position.
I mean, it's surely disappointing, yeah, for them.
Yeah. In 8th place, we have Austria, who are doing amazingly. And honestly, I think are probably happy with 8th place. I did challenge Andreas to get a 5th or higher this year, but, 8th is pretty good, especially for a team that regularly said that they did no preparation going into this event. Although every time somebody tells me that, I'm starting to think that it might be some kind of weird psyop situation where they're trying to convince me they don't care, but they actually do care greatly about the results of what was going to happen.
Yeah, I think there's at least a little bit of care in all of these statements.
Yep. Then in 9th place, we have New Zealand, who I think are ecstatic about this result. 3 wins, 3 draws, and a loss, and kind of putting themselves into a position where they might get upgraded to seed 1 after this year, I think. Kind of depends on a few other factors, I think, but
could be.
They might very well get upgraded to the top seed, or they'll be at the top of seed 2. Neither of which are bad positions to be in for a team that's in its second year, and they seemed pretty happy with where they were at. And that win against Canada was kind of like the capstone, I think, that they wanted on their event for this year. And then they also won best sports because they were picked by all 7 of their opponents as their number 1 sports team for the weekend. And so they won best sports, which I think is a great award to win for any team.
Definitely.
And then in 10th place, we have Italy with the same record, 3 wins, 3 draws, and a loss. I feel like Italy has to be pretty happy with that as a seed 2 team.
Yeah, I mean,
Two teams in the
if
top 10 is pretty
if you
impressive.
look at who they played, it's also pretty solid. I mean, they've played Australia, Canada, Belgium, Bulgaria, England.
Yeah, they drew against Canada, I believe. They beat Bulgaria and Belgium, or the pairings might be off a little bit.
They beat
I see where it's
Norway,
going.
then drew Malta, which could be seen as a little bit of a slip down. Then they lost Australia by 1 point. They drew Canada, beat Bulgaria, beat Belgium, and drew England.
Yep, which is actually pretty good results against tier 1 teams as well. Like a 1 point loss to Australia and then drawing against England are pretty good results for a tier 2 team, or a seed 2.
Definitely.
Keep saying alternating between the two, but seed I think is a little bit better when we're talking about this.
Seed is the official naming that the WTC is using. I used to confuse seeds with pods, and pods which was very unfortunate because pod is actually what they call like the groups. So yeah, that I've had a couple of very confusing conversations with Aishik about this.
Yeah, I think it's better to call them seed 1, seed 2, seed 3, seed 4 teams, especially because like I think tier has like a different connotation to it, and I think it's unfair to teams to be slotted in that way.
Yeah.
Seed 1, seed 2, seed 3, seed 4, I think is a little bit better. We do have some seed 1 teams out of the top 10, Australia and the Netherlands outside the top 10. Australia in 11th
and 12th, respectively.
Yep. And then looking at our newcomers, our top placing newcomer was Singapore, Thailand in 15th place, 3 losses and 4 wins. They managed to God dang it, Romania. They managed to pretty convincingly beat some of their opponents, and they scared a couple of their early opponents. When they played Poland and they played Canada, both those teams were kind of surprised at the number of points that Singapore, Thailand pulled off of them. And there were a couple moments during the Canada game where the Canadians looked pretty uncertain about what was going to happen. And then they managed to win against Latvia, and they managed to beat China, and then they managed to beat Romania, and then they lost to Ireland, and then won against Slovakia. So they kind of pretty easily cemented themselves as the top performing new team this year, which is the award that they won at this year's event.
Yep.
So you can probably expect them to be a seed 2 next year.
Yeah, most definitely. They've only got one event, so their weighted average is fairly easy to calculate.
Yes.
Should slot right in there. Just like New Zealand did last year, and they were a seed 2 team going into this year's event. We'll see about next year.
So obviously, we should say that Singapore, Thailand should be shooting for that 9th place spot to just keep following along New Zealand's trajectory as like best new team that scares a lot of teams in their first year. So there you go, Singapore, Thailand. An expectation for next year to place in 9th place and beat up on some more tier seed 1 teams.
Yeah, I think it's also worth of note that something that we were saying during the studio streams, that behind the podium or the top 5, it gets really, really close and every point matters. So actually, England in 7th have the same amount of match points as Ireland in 13th. So that's 7 teams tied on match points, and about the differential points were the only differentiator at that stage, right?
Yep. And in the top 5, won by battle points with 700. But Spain was only 51 battle points behind them at 707. And then for Poland, Sweden, and the USA, they were also all really close in like the 650 to 690 range. So like the points are pretty tight, even not considering records. So like the top teams are definitely pretty tight together in terms of performance. Vic in chat saying we were lucky to get 7th. Gosh,
I think Vic was the only guy from the English team that wasn't like completely bummed out after the Italy game, at least from what I saw them. Vic was just like laughing at what's happening, so taking it a lot better than the rest of the guys.
That's good, because Vic is one of the nicest people on the planet, and seeing Vic sad and depressed and despondent over the result would have made me very deeply deeply sad for the situation. And then just to check in on a couple other teams, I believe who got most improved? Was that Slovakia who got most improved this year? Or was that Czechia? I think it was Czechia.
It was Czechia, yeah. They finished in 18th. And they were a team we've been closely following during the event.
Mm-hmm.
So they finished on 7 match points and 577 differential points, having played Belgium, Germany, Cyprus, Switzerland, Canada, Denmark, and Austria. And out of those, they've lost to Germany and Austria. They've managed to beat Belgium and Cyprus, and then they've had draws into Switzerland, Canada, and Denmark.
And the Canada and Denmark's were on the high end of those draws. In the Canada game, they only drew by 1 battle point. They only needed they didn't need much in either of those situations.
They needed 2 more to get a win because it was 84.
Yeah, they only needed 2 more into Canada, and they only needed 4 more into Denmark in order to take those, which is not bad at all. Like, those are really good results for Czechia. And then only losing to seed 1 teams is impressive as well. I think if you'll listen to our coverage throughout the whole event, we were watching to see who Czechia would kick in the teeth. And they came very close to kicking some very surprised opponents in the teeth along the way.
We were very much rooting for them to be the Titan killers, so to speak. Then I think that Denmark had a very good start. They finished 19th at the end of the event, also with 7 match points, losing out to Czechia by 1 differential point. They've managed to beat Iceland, South Korea, then lose to Sweden in the pod, beat New Zealand to start the Swiss phase, take a pretty heavy loss into USA, and then I think maybe the morale went down a bit, and they drew Czechia and had a small loss into Netherlands.
I think, unfortunately for them, they caught. I think the United States kind of on a vengeance tour in the second game after losing to Poland in a tight result. And so
that's
only getting 35 differential points is kind of a bit of a problem when you're looking at placements, because that means that you have very few differential points in order to adjust placements later.
Exactly.
A slightly different change that maybe pushes them up a spot if they score a little bit better in that matchup, but not much, just a little bit, I think.
Yeah, then in 20th we've got Canada, and also on 7 match points. I think Canada might be disappointed as well with that result. I'm pretty sure they were looking at getting back into seed 1, but this is not gonna happen.
This is more like holding on to seed 2, because they're in 20th place, so they're outside of seed 2 range currently. But with the historical placements, they might be able to get back into seed 2 with it, because we only have 9 pods right now, right?
No, it was 10 each. So
was it 10? So they'd be right at the edge of
so
seed 2.
They'll definitely stay there. And
Dickie
also
in our chat letting us know that Team Canada is in fact disappointed at their placement.
Then also on 7 match points, we still have Northern Ireland in 21st. Looking at their Facebook page, they were quite happy with that result. And we've also got Malta in 22nd, also on 7 match points, which I think is a team that kind of went under the radar. I mean, they've almost finished in the top half. They're newcomers as well, and they've managed to pull a draw into Italy. Then they beat Israel, drew Slovakia, drew Iceland, and beat Mexico.
Yep. I mean, not a bad result, and definitely Malta coming off their first year as a UN team and now coming into this as a full team for the first time this year is definitely a good result for them, especially because I don't know how large from our interview in Round Zero Pairings, I remember hearing that the Maltese community is not humongous. So, when you don't have a gigantic pool of talent to pull from necessarily, you can have a bit of a harder time sometimes pushing much higher, but they did really good. I'm sure that the Maltesers are very happy. That is not 100%. What they're called, but that's what I'm going to call them today, just for the Malta captain. Romania's title, by the way, keeps getting longer. I just found them at 27th, where they are. Romania God Emperor Tom did not protect, so we drank the rocket fuel. Good job, Romania. No matter what, you win.
Wasn't
You win.
much left to do.
You win a place in my heart, no matter what, just for the titles.
Yeah, if they had scored 4 more differential points, they would have been much higher because they'd have 2 draws become wins.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit unlucky there, but it is what it is.
And then the next newcomer, I think, after that is China in 32nd.
Yes.
And China, actually, not a bad result for a first year. 3 draws, 1 win, 3 losses, which isn't bad at all. Their first game was into England, where one of their players did manage to beat one of the English players, what they were quite excited about, because I believe the person who beat the English captain is like a very young player as well, I think. And so they were quite excited about it. And then Ireland was a draw. South Africa was a draw. Yep. Then they lost to Singapore, Thailand. A very close matchup into South Korea. They just needed a couple points there to pull off a win. And then a win into Israel, and then a loss into Northern Ireland. So not really a bad result at all. 30 seconds, pretty good.
Then we have Mexico and South Korea on 33rd and 34th. So very close to where China was. And the last newcomer in 40th, Andorra.
Yeah. Andorra's probably just like a little disappointed, but at the same time, Andorra has like, from what I was told, 12 people who play Warhammer 40k or something like that in the country.
And 7 of them were on the team.
Yeah, 7 of them were on the team. So I don't think you can be disappointed with a result when most of your country's Warhammer 40k community comes along.
Yeah, and they did get a match point, right? So it's not like they were just beaten by everyone. So
they drew into Luxembourg, who was in 39th.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Mexico was ecstatic, actually. They managed to win a couple games, which was a couple matches, which they were very excited about. They managed to beat Latvia, and then they beat Cyprus. And then they lost to Malta and to Norway, as well as to New Zealand and to Austria, which are not bad results. New Zealand's basically a seed 1, and Austria is a seed 1 team, so like nothing to be sad about there at all.
Yep. They did get a tough pod, as it turned out to be, having, as you said, pretty much 2 seed 1 teams. Right, we've got a question from the chat from Jonathan. After listening to Enter the Matrix, what do you think about the statement from Pumba? The gap between top teams has closed significantly and anyone could have won the event. Well, I, for one, agree.
I do think anybody could have won the event at the start of Swiss, essentially. When we were talking a little bit earlier about like who could have won the event from a practical standpoint, that was more of talking about going into the last round about who could have won the event at that point. But it definitely was a lot wider of a field than we've seen previously. And we're also seeing a lot of new teams do really well, or teams that are only in their second year of playing at WTC. And you've seen some teams that have been traditionally more strong struggle this year more so than in previous years. I mean, the United States could have podiumed, but they got 5th. England is in 7th place. You have the Netherlands and then Australia outside of the top 10. That indicates that the field has a lot more parity in it than it used to, because there are more teams that can compete with one another at a more even level. And you see potential new seed 1 teams kind of in the rising. Like New Zealand definitely could be a seed 1 team pretty soon, or even next year, depending on how many teams are in pods and stuff like that next year. So if there's enough new teams, those might get expanded even further, and those might be more teams included. And then you also saw some favorites struggle, like Belgium placed in 14th above Singapore, Thailand in 15th. And so you saw some of those teams that people had as favorites struggle a little bit more, and even players on those teams struggle a bit as well.
Yeah, and just like you said, I mean, we are seeing seed 2 teams really coming into the fold, like playing on seed 1 level. We've got New Zealand, we've got Italy, who I don't think anyone bet their money on, but they've managed to land in 10th, and they've caused some trouble to the seed 1 teams. Ireland are also looking up, right? They had a good record. They've had as much match points as England had in seventh. So yeah, it really is. You really have to take a wider look. And I think next year, when the seed one teams will be preparing, obviously gunning for the win. And as they've mentioned in their interviews, given how much time you have to prepare, you only really focus on the other seed one teams, but you might have to look at the other teams now as well, given that they might surprisingly or come up in the Swiss phase during the first day of the Swiss, so day 3 of the event, right?
So you've got to watch out, for some new teams that might surprise you by taking battle points off of you, match points and differential points off of you, which is what Singapore, Thailand did during their games initially, and surprised some folks. And then on the other end, you also have to watch out for seed twos that might very well be seed one teams in disguise at this point. Like Spain was last year, I believe Spain once was a seed two, but actually was basically a seed one team.
They were last year. Spain was seed 2 last year.
Yes, so they were a seed one team in disguise.
Yeah,
so people,
exactly.
you definitely need to watch out for those seed two teams, especially because some of them are extremely good. All of them are extremely good, but some of them have aspirations of being seed one. So seed one teams might have to, like Joker said, expand their prep to include a few more folks, and also need to look at the seed four teams for new teams that are coming in, because you don't know how good those teams are until they sneak up and beat you,
Exactly.
as it were.
Yep. Right. I think it's time we move on a bit because we've actually gone on for quite a while. I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the entourage. So this year we did a little fantasy draft along with Aishik, like a huge shout out to him for helping bring the idea into reality. So first of all, I'll just summarize the rules real quick, as turns out that when you have a semi-automated form to participate, rules reading happens to be a bit of a challenge sometimes. So each participant or someone willing to participate had to pick a squad of 8 players that had to adhere to 4 little rules. So maximum of 1 player from a country. Each faction only appears once, so just like per the WTC rules. Maximum of 2 players from each seed. That bit was automated in the form, and no substitutions can be made throughout the event. Well, there wasn't any way to actually do that, so that was all good. Then a little bit of numbers. So we've had 302 total submissions, which exceeded my expectations by like 30 times. I was thinking that maybe 10 people will submit something. Out of those, around 90 were incorrect, and 25 have been subsequently corrected. After reaching out via emails or Discord chats or, whatever available media source. We've had 5 duplicate entries that we had to remove. So after all of that, we've finished with 228 participants after corrections and cleanup. And we've had, out of the 302 submissions, we've had around 250 trivia responses. So stuff like, who will finish second in the pod with Austria and New Zealand? And New Zealand finished their second by 2 differential points, so very, very close. And stuff like that, like how many points will Liam VSL score? I don't think anyone was actually correct. Tough luck. So going into a little bit more detail about the players, the scores, etc. So the most common picks from each seed. For seed 1, we've had Manichima, who's been picked by 58 Roku traders, let's call them. And he scored 85 points. And then we've also had Anthony Vanella, who's made 84 entourages and scored 100. For seed 2, we have a whopping almost like 90% pick rate of Liam, who's been drafted by 191 people and delivered 92 points for them. And then we've also got Ines, who's been picked by 83 people and brought 83 points. So 1 point for each person that chose him. Then from seed 3, we've got Jakub Jansa from Team Czechia, picked by 60 participants, scored 99, and Yoku, who was picked by 86 participants, scored 805. And in seed 4, we've got 2 Merc choices. So Paul was on the Slovakia team, picked by 26 people and scored 67, and Sebastian was playing in Team Luxembourg. He's been picked by 39 people and scored 62 points, both players of some TTS fame. However, most valuable picks, as it turns out, for seed 1, we've got Jesper from Sweden. He's only been picked once, and by a fellow Swedish person. He scored 114, and Olivier scored 122, been picked by 14 participants. In seed 2,
He was
we've
the
got...
highest scoring player at the event, was Olivier.
Yes.
Ronaldo.
And I was looking through that yesterday when I was preparing this, and I was very much surprised looking at the individual placings that he wasn't first. David was actually first with 118.
It's because he drew.
Yeah, exactly. So I was wondering what were the tiebreakers. So I guess wins before differential points, before something else.
Yep.
Then we've actually got 2 people sitting on 107 in seat 2. So that was Francesco from the Italian team. He's not been picked at all. And we've got Nicolas from Team Greece, who's been picked by 2 participants. Both scored 107 points throughout the event. And in seed 3, we've got Geir, who's been picked by 7 participants. He scored 106. And Yoko, who we've already mentioned, got picked by 86 people, and he scored 105. In seed 4, we've got Leaf, who played in place of Nicholas Fredriks. But I don't remember which team he merked for. He's been picked by 17 participants, scored a solid 108. And Ryan from Team Mota, picked by 6 participants, scored 110. However, you wouldn't be able to pick all of these people on your team, as this is 3 Space Marine players, so Jesper, Olivier, and Leaf. That's 2,000 Suns players, Geir and David. Yeah, so that's a little bit rough. So the most valuable entourage would actually be Lucas Wabak, playing on Tyranids from Team Austria. He's got 109. Olivier, who we've mentioned before, he's the French Space Marine player. Then from seed 2, our picks would have to be not either, but David on Thousand Suns from New Zealand. And then either Francesco or Nicolas, playing Necrons and Sisters respectively, which is fine because that will be balanced by the seed 4 picks in a moment. From seed 3, we'd need to take Pavel on Imperial Guard from Team Bulgaria, 104 points, and Yoko, already covered him. And in seed 4, we'd have to take Ash on Sisters if we chose Francesco from seed 2, or Kifan from Team China on Necrons if we chose Nicholas and seed 2. Both of them scored 103. And we're taking Ryan on Chaos Demons from Team Mota, who was the most valuable pick we've mentioned just before. This team would bring in a total of 878 points. And there's also a fun fact. No team brought such a team composition to the event.
I would have been more concerned if somebody had the level of foresight necessary to make every single one of these picks. Chifan, that player from China, was the player who beat Tony Chu in the first round. And he did not lose
to him.
He didn't lose a single game across the entire event.
He played 4th. He placed 4th individually, and I, for one, was very happy about it because I did pick him for my team.
Oh boy!
So looking at the final results, Mota is the winner. He'll be getting a contactlost T-shirt along with some dice. Geir, who was leading going into the final round, finished 6 points behind. Fun fact, he chose himself, but he actually ended up pretty well doing that, scoring 106 points himself and being one of the most valuable seed-free picks. Well done to him. He'll be getting some contactless dice as well when I get the chance to meet him or meet anyone from Norway, and also a little pack of 5 dice for Sintas in third place, who's got 771 points.
You're in Joker.
Yeah,
you're
some
in fourth
Joker
place.
Guy. Yeah, not bad, right? Guys, this wasn't rigged, right? That's why I'm in fourth. Only in fourth.
It's not first Joker, second Joker, third Joker.
Nope. And yeah, I had Keyfan from the beginning. I didn't change it in the back end during the event. So instantly, all of these guys had Nicholas, who was replaced by Leaf, who was one of the most valuable picks. They've all had Yoku. Well, they've all had Liam VSL, but who didn't, as you can see here. And yeah, they've also all had Anthony Vanella on their team. So quite a lot of common picks between them. There, that's that in terms of the entourage. I hope everyone's enjoyed this little fun mini game. I'm obviously hoping to bring it back next year. What more can I say? Hopefully it will actually get more participants and maybe some better reward systems. Well, but we'll see about that. Right, I'm taking this off the screen for now. Nathan, maybe you'll participate next year.
It would require me to remember, but maybe I will. I'll beat all of you using stats. That is not how that works.
No, you need the gift of foresight, as you've already mentioned.
Yeah, you need to have your finger on the pulse a little bit better than I do sometimes. So do we want to talk about?
Apparently, you can just find your players in the hall, your players, and tell them to push in the final round.
Yes, I can just walk around and tell them to push. Oh.
Which is fun. I mean, if someone threw a game to get a better score in the entourage, that would be like my life complete.
I love it.
See, Nathan, vibes are more important than stats.
Sometimes. I'm not going to tell you that stats are always correct. Sometimes you do have to operate a bit off of vibes, guys. Not going to lie to you about that. And there's no way that you can use stats 100% of the time to predict these results. It's forecasting has errors. So now we're going to talk a little bit about, I think, biggest winners and overperformers, biggest losers and underperformers, kind of like as a portion of stats, I think, more than anything else.
Okay.
I'm stealing the stats today because I did not have time this last week to kind of dive in and do my own analysis. So I'm stealing a spreadsheet from Breaking Heads because they put together a really nice spreadsheet that you all can look at. If you want to go find them, you can find them at
really good.
You can just Google Breaking Heads.
Let's do that as well.
Why don't you post the link in chat and then people can follow along if they want.
Yeah.
They collected and then did a really great job of analyzing all the results from the WTC this year. So you should go check it out, take a look, see how things worked out for you. This is what I'm going to be using for some of my stuff today. Unfortunately, sometimes when you get back and
sorry to cut in, but I think if StatsDad is stealing your spreadsheet with stats, you've done a good job.
Yes, definitely. So I think kind of the most interesting thing to pull out of this is not necessarily some of the best overall performance stuff, which is still interesting, or even the best people in the various factions, which is also interesting, but for a different reason. But to look at the faction stats primarily, and then the matchup kind of overview. And I think kind of the more interesting thing here to talk about is kind of what we have from our outline, which is overperformers and underperformers from a faction standpoint more than anything else. Because I think this is what people really want to pull out from this data is like who did well with what, and like how the various factions kind of performed when you take a look at them in the overall stats for the event. Because some people are going to try to think about, like, should I too take 100 Primaris Crusaders and then try to win every event with them? It's not a bad plan. I'm not going to tell you it's a bad plan, but there were only 4 players, and I think most of them kind of leaned on the fact that Oliver won all of his games with that list, so it is worth considering. I don't think that list isn't necessarily one I would qualify as an overperformer, just as an example, but something that we picked out in other podcasts that I was on, like Art of War Down Under did an episode on the WTC as well. And that was the list that we'd all kind of picked out as the most interesting list and the one that we expected to kind of do well. So it is maybe worth picking up if you feel like you want to paint 100 Space Marines. I'm not going to recommend it, though, to you, because that's a lot of Space Marines to paint. Also ignore the fact that I'm trying to figure out how to paint 100 Space Marines.
But if you
Don't
paint
look at
100
me.
Space Marines, you have like 60,000 points of Space Marines at that point, right? You just need the right amount of hands,
It's
and
true.
you're good. You have
And just
every possible unit in the Codex.
Just going to magnetize them at the shoulders, and it can just switch out weapons all the time with all of them. True.
You have to do
But I
it with
think
Space Marines.
the most interesting thing, though, that I think I pulled out from this is Chaos Demons for overperformers. So I think going into this, if you look at the individual stats, Chaos Demons, kind of like for singles events, aren't doing amazingly. They're doing okay. And so kind of what's interesting when you look at the WTC event, like Chaos Demons have 52% win rate in singles across this current balance data slate and have 2 event wins, but they're not considered a top tier army at the moment. But if you go in here, Chaos Demons have about a 54%. They averaged 13 differential points, and they only had 10 overall losses while managing to average 13 battle points across the whole totality of it for only. So this data set is going to be small, though, so people need to be cognizant of that. But they were the best overall performing faction from a differential point scoring perspective for the WTC. So this is the faction that I would pick as my overperformer for the week.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. It's worth noting, though, that it's a very much a tech choice, and yeah, only 4 players. So out of those 4 players, 2 of them were in Seed 1, or 3 of them? I know Sweden and Spain had demons. Malta had demons, but who else had demons?
Yep.
I can't remember off the top of my head.
The other thing that you can do, Joker, is you can hit the next tab, which is the matchup overview. And this will show you a matrix kind of like who performed well. And honestly, from a matchup performance perspective, the demons only did poorly into one matchup, which was Chaos Space Marines, where they only got like a 6. And then the rest of it is like an 8 or higher, which is pretty decent. And then drawing into themselves, obviously. But otherwise, they have the most positive matchups as well as any. And part of that might be because there's a relatively small data set backing them. But the other part of it is that if this is a choice taken only by a few teams and they're performing really well, this is kind of a sign that I think that they definitely overperformed just a little bit.
Yep. Interestingly, they've not played a single game against Space Marines, despite all teams sporting a Space Marine variety. Oh, no, there's Blood Angels here.
There you go.
They sneaked in a different column. Okay.
Otherwise, the top performing factions after that from an average BP standpoint aren't too strange. Space Wolves are up there. I don't think anybody should really be surprised by Space Wolves doing well. Prior to this last data slate, they were doing really amazingly. Wolf Jail is a teams list that does really well with locking some people into their own zone so that they never get to move, so they never get to score. I don't think anybody's surprised by Dark Angels being up there. A lot of teams took Dark Angels. They ended up with an average of a 12.1.
I think more teams took Dark Angels than Space Wolves, than the Wolf Jail, as their Space Marine flavor.
And then Thousand Suns, nobody's surprised there at them doing well. 33. There were 33 players playing Thousand Suns at this event. That is most of the teams having Thousand Suns player. And that also kind of means when you look at all the Space Wolves, Dark Angels, Space Marines, Black Templars, and Blood Angels data, like when you take all that together, like most people also have a Power Armor Space Marine faction of some kind on their teams as well. I think the next
Yeah,
surprising
Thousand
one was
Suns were the second most popular pick in terms of team comp. Only Space Marines had been picked by all of the teams. Thousand Suns in second.
for a potential overperformer, maybe Astra Militarum. If you wanted to take a look at this, they scored 10.9 in singles. Currently, Astra Militarum is doing pretty middling at 49% for a win rate. They have won events though, which indicates that there's like potential there. And there were a number of different versions of this kind of in existence at WTC. 18 Bulgrin was kind of one of them. A lot of -1 damage, a lot of ability to be tacky and hold points, a lot of ability to counteract some of the various damage to pressure lists that kind of exist out there, like say Blood Angels or World Leaders even, who have a lot of damage to attacks. Like you have the ability to kind of push those armies back a little bit just by having -1 damage kind of at will there. Not specifically to those, but while also being backed by relatively solid either 2-up armor saves on a bunch of hulls, which can let you absorb a lot of firepower, or, you know, ranged firepower that is also quite good at picking up units. So while only 10 players kind of were there, which is about 25% of the field taking them, they did pretty well, almost averaging an 11 and a 50% win rate, which is pretty convenient. This kind of takes us to the first maybe underperformer, which I think is Sisters. 10.7 is roughly an 11. They were one of the most picked factions kind of for the event. They still did relatively well. 48.3% win rate isn't like unrespectable. What was that?
Third most.
I saw your hand go up. Yep.
So I was
and Sisters in the single stats are like one of the most dangerous factions in singles at the moment, with a 57% win rate, making up 14% of top 4-0 event starts, and having the second most event wins currently at the moment, tied for second with a number of other factions. So this kind of positioning for them is kind of an underperformance, and probably indicates that we've got some matchups perhaps to look at for Sisters, and kind of like maybe people kind of figured out what they needed to do with Sisters in order to kind of work them over a little bit. And
yeah, I've got a fun fact here in terms of Sisters. So the French team didn't take Sisters, and their team comp was very comfortable into Sisters. They won the event, so that could be telling.
And some of it is that like Sisters aren't necessarily a blowout army either in some ways. So if you're able to just kind of chip a couple of points off that differential, you take them into draw territory, whereas somebody kind of wants a 14, maybe a 15 out of that army. And instead they're getting a lot of 11s and 12s, which is differential points kind of in your favor. And if you look at their matchup matrix, that's kind of where they're at. Their highest matchup was into Death Guard, where they had like a 17, but otherwise they're kind of sitting around 8 to 12 with like a little bit above that, which isn't super amazing. You kind of want more points out of those types of factions. You can't be getting 8s when you need 12s or 14s. I guess let me switch back. Flipping between tabs a lot. Grey Knights and Necrons are kind of right there with them, to be honest. Grey Knights and Necrons also taken quite frequently. Not doing anything in particular. Grey Knights are kind of a more drawish faction, kind of broadly. I think some people thought that they'd be really good into melee armies, and Anthony Vanilla kind of managed to smash them quite a bit, although one player does not a matchup matrix make. But you do see them having problems into Chaos Demons, Space Wolves, and Dark Angels. Which
not necessarily into World Eaters, looking at averages here.
Yeah, if you look at World Eaters, not everybody can be the Prophet of Khorne.
There can only be one, right?
It's true. Although a 12 is probably also what you don't want out of that matchup. And then Blood Angels very low for an army that you kind of brought in order to smash, right? You didn't bring Blood Angels to get a 10 on average. You brought Blood Angels to this event in order to crush people into submission. And Blood Angels had kind of a number of not great matchups. They had a bad matchup into Chaos Demons, not great into Space Wolves, definitely not great into their counters, kind of like Dark Angels and stuff like that. They definitely had a rough time into Black Templars. And into Thousand Suns, one of the most common armies at the event. Like, there's a lot of armies here that they just have no great answers to when you look at the data from the Matrix kind of as a whole.
Yeah, if you look at the popular factions that were taken by teams, there's only the Necron matchup that really stands out here, right? Well, the average into Votan is higher, but Votan was a fringe pick.
Yep.
So
definitely perhaps a situation where
not
people
good.
had kind of figured out a little bit what to do into a Dark Angel or into a Blood Angels player. If you want to as well, you can filter this down to the top 10 just for folks who are listening. So you can just ignore all this and just focus on just like the seed 1 teams without the pod phase. And you can see some more of this data. And this is consistent if you look at the Blood Angels data there as well, where Blood Angels only had a 33% win rate and only averaged 8.6 battle points. So definitely something that people had an answer to if you're interested in kind of digging into even smaller realms of data, although I don't suggest looking at ever narrowing piles of data to kind of draw your conclusions, just because like that top 10 has like a very small amount of data in it, and so you don't want to make too many conclusions from it. But it is useful for taking a look at, like, some people will say, well, Nathan, the top 10 is in the top 10 and clearly they're just amazing at 40k and have all the answers to all of our problems. And to that I say, sometimes sure, you could look at the top 10 and be like, yeah, if in perfect hands, perhaps they're just better. But when you look at the Blood Angels
this
numbers,
isn't a data set that you can extrapolate into big singles events, right? This is very, very specific. But if you're looking to win the WTC, this is very relevant.
Yep. So if you look at Blood Angels and you kind of look at Sisters, they can kind of be two of the things that were a little bit more disappointing. And like I said, Black Templars and kind of Space Wolves looking like pretty good picks. Same with Astra Militarum. That's kind of further supported by if you just look at the top 10 teams as well. Because I only like specifically giving stats where I get to turn out to be correct. That's how that works, guys.
Makes sense.
Otherwise, for underperforming factions, Orcs, I think, is one that actually performed at the level that I kind of expected it looking at this. They're the worst performing faction kind of the week. They only averaged about 8 battle points. Their top performing player only had 83 battle points, which is the second or third lowest. Yeah, third. Oh, no, I missed AdMac. Fourth lowest. So, and that's kind of, if you look at the top 10, they're kind of in the middle, but their win percentage there's just one person in the top 10, which is Lucas, who was on Team USA. He only won one game out of pod phase. Yep. For a 25% win rate. So I know, I just looked at the top 10.
Okay.
Yep. It's fine.
There
I think people probably were also a little disappointed in themselves that they took AdMac one of the other, and actually the second worst performing. Man, Imperial Knights are there with 68. Keep missing factions apparently when I'm cruising through this. 69 battle points is their top performing faction. 8.9 on average, 38% win rate. Not great for Adeptus Mechanicus. I can't really call it a super underperformance though, because Adeptus Mechanicus aren't doing like amazingly in single stats, but people were taking them for a reason. And it doesn't really seem like they were 100% doing what people wanted them to be doing. But if you look at the Adeptus Mechanicus, and if you look at the Adeptus Mechanicus stats for just the top 10, they won 2 games, they drew 1, and they lost 1 for a 50% win rate, and they were averaging about 10 battle points. Might be something we'll have to talk to. I think Team Poland was the only top 10 team that had AdMac on their roster. It's definitely something to ask Typhus and Pumbaa about at some point to see kind of like what the general thought process was about taking that, and the kind of like what it did for them in their matrix and the reason that they took it. Because it is okay to let you know to take these armies if you kind of have a specific purpose for them.
I think no one's going to kill me when I say it right now. One of the reasons to take AdMac was the fact that we had one player in our community 20-0 1,000 Suns with AdMac 8 out of 8 times.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't look like that kind of quite panned out in the overall matrix.
No, it didn't quite transpire looking at the average battle points.
Yep. But was there anything in here, Joker, that you thought was an over underperformance? I kind of pulled out the ones that I was thinking about. I definitely am going to be poking people to be taking Chaos Demons, perhaps. Definitely be poking people to take, say, like Space Marines of some variety. Like every team should have some kind of Space Marines in it, whether that's Space Wolves, Black Templars, or Dark Angels. Like all of those are great armies to take depending on your team comp.
Yeah, I think for me at least, Chaos Demons definitely, like, wow, I would never have expected them to win a single game, let alone 15 games, and drive up a 53.6% win rate. Dark Angels went a little bit under the radar in Poland, so surprised to see them there. For underperformance performers, definitely Necrons and Blood Angels, but you've already mentioned those. I think
You could say
Chaos Space Marines as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say
well. And they also not very well.
I'd agree with both of those. I think Chaos Space Marines were a very popular choice, and I talked about this with a few other people. I was like, I don't think Chaos Space Marines are as good as people think that they are. If you do look at the top 10 kind of to see if that was still true at top tables, it does appear that they were kind of just in the middle. They weren't good or bad. But you do see world leaders who are disappointing in the overall data jump up quite considerably into like a 66 point. They win 2/3 of their game with a 13 almost for average battle differential points.
I'd call Drukhari over performers as well, given that not many people are having too much success with them in singles. Averaging out 10 battle points is quite okay.
Drukhari actually currently the #1 performing singles army with a 59% win rate and 6 GT wins.
Oh yeah, I think I saw something on like one of the Meta Mondays, or they just pop up on Facebook randomly, and there was a moment where they had a 71% win rate. What's up?
Yeah, there might be a week or something in there. We'll have to be taking a closer look at that because it's definitely Drukhari are doing very well on pariah missions where they kind of have to score differently. But in a pairing system, they didn't do nearly as well. And this is kind of one of those instances where you can see that like maybe it doesn't translate as well. Like a 45%, a 10 average, high score of like 100. When you go into the top 10 for there were 3 Drukhari players with a 58.3 and an 11.2. So they weren't doing badly, but they definitely weren't living up to, say, the kind of like hype that you'd expect from the top performing singles army being taken and translated into teams, which is definitely. It's definitely fair to say that's kind of an underperformance, but teams is a different beast in a lot of ways.
In that regard, yeah.
More funny to me is that like last year when you were looking at factions and how they did, Eldari have fallen off quite a bit.
Well, they're like a totally different army at this point.
It's true. It's just funny to look at the data now as compared to before. When last year we were looking at like double Wraith Knights all over the place.
That's true. I don't think anyone was missing that. What was the win rate last year? I don't know. I don't think I want to know. It was definitely something.
I don't think anybody wants to know.
Ridiculous.
I think altogether, what you can take from this is that there is like the current meta for teams kind of requires you to have like a few factions in it. But like after that, there's like a lot of open space kind of in the performance for factions, and that people do in teams find answers to specific factions. Like Blood Angels definitely feels like a faction that people found an answer to. And Thousand Sons seemed like an army that people didn't necessarily find an answer to, but did find a way to kind of limit them a bit if you look at their scores. Because while they were still winning games, they were only averaging about 11 points.
I mean, yeah, it's this only like reinforces the fact that the field is very much open, and after you get like the 5 most popular army picks, then the remaining 3 is like everything counts, right? You need to be prepared for anything, and you can take anything to really deliver results. I mean, Spain and Sweden had some very interesting choices. Like Sweden had Imperial Knights, Chaos Knights, Votan, among other things, Drukari and Demons,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Spain also had Demons and Drukari. So very interesting choices, and
they seemed pretty happy with their choice for Imperial Knights though as well. So like when you look at the top 10, it doesn't look like they were doing a lot, but they got 9 battle points on average. And they were actually pretty happy with it overall for Imperial Knights. So I guess even if you look at these stats, sometimes you just got to be wondering what's going on. And they did have a couple really good matchups, but
yeah, exactly. You need to. There is like another layer that you need to factor in. Like this isn't the whole picture, right? It also matters what the faction does for you in the pairings process in the matrix. Because even if it's a faction that's not performing very well, maybe just getting off those 8-9 points is exactly what you need and frees up your heavy hitters to do heavy hitting or whatever.
Yep. And those are kind of things that you'll never be able to pull out of the stats like this without knowing how the pairing process actually goes as like a reporting element, which is something that we'll just never get. Unfortunately. So what we'll have to do at some point is probably ask some people some questions about the pairings process and how they were using some of these factions. And you get a little bit during the last round of our interviews when I think Zandre talks a little bit about the pairings process, and the Swedish Coast also talks a little bit about the pairings process, kind of in how they were using armies a little bit. So it'll be something that you'll have to look at, I think, in the upcoming coverage more than anything else. And maybe, Joker, you can get a few coaches or captains to come on and like talk a little bit about how some of their rare factions or something were used.
It's an idea. It's an idea to do something of this sort. We'll see if anyone will want to come again and talk about the pairings yet again and show something that they didn't show us during the event. Oh, and Nathan's disappeared for some reason. But I think we're pretty much done with the stats bit. Let me try and see what's going on. And the only thing that we've got to talk about left is Nathan. I've said we're done with stats, and I think we are.
Yay! I mean, I'm not yay, but my
who are you? What have you done with me?
What have I done? Yeah, people at WTC, if you want my attention, just show me awesome spreadsheets, and I'll be happy to come over to your table and like talk to you for as long as you want. The Netherlands coach and captains like definitely realized that they could lure me over with spreadsheets and visualizations, and so I was over there quite often looking at that stuff with them. And yeah, my browser crashed. I don't know. Google Chrome decided it didn't like the world and exploded, basically, is what happened.
You run out of RAM.
Yeah, for stats.
For it to eat.
My Google Chrome was tired of me reading off Excel spreadsheets and decided to die, which is fine. I get it.
It happens. Right. So I was saying that the last bit of thing that we wanted to touch upon is like the biggest winners / overperformers in terms of actual teams, and then the same for losers / underperformers. I think we've mentioned some of this already, but do you want to pick like 2 or 3 for each?
Sure. So like biggest winners / overperformers, like the biggest winner is obviously France because they won the event. But also for biggest winners, I think you could say New Zealand, Singapore, Thailand, and Czechia were all the biggest winners if we don't just look at France. Biggest losers / underperformers is hard. I think it depends on kind of the perspective, and from conversations with coaches and stuff, kind of the perspective on some of that changes a little bit. I definitely think England probably would consider themselves one of the bigger losers or underperformers this year. They definitely came in with aspirations to win the whole event and kind of fell out even of the top 5. Man, this is hard. I think Canada definitely isn't happy with their results. I don't know if I would consider them one of the biggest underperformers, but they definitely did underperform based on conversations with them and how they were prepping and stuff like that. And then maybe Belgium as the third one for underperformers. It's definitely not where people kind of expected them to be towards the end of the event, and they definitely did lose more games than people anticipated. And people were anticipating pretty great things out of them, I think.
Yeah, but it's hard because a lot of the teams that slipped early on and we thought were not going to finish very well actually didn't manage to pull up a couple of places in the end, like Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that easy to pick an underperformer. But if I were going to pick one or two, I definitely go with Canada. Sorry, guys, and maybe the Netherlands on missing out a top 10 spot.
That seems reasonable.
Yeah, and for overperformers, I definitely think, or biggest winners, apart from France, I think Spain have done a tremendous job.
I think
They
that's good.
finished second. Given that last year they were coming in as a seed 2 team, although a seed 1 team in a trench coat.
A
But
French
they've made
coat.
trench coat.
Oh, I heard French coat and was like, I don't think I understand that cliche joke. You're gonna have to explain it to me later.
Done. I've explained it. But yeah, I think they've made tremendous progress, and it's very well good to see. I think Germany have done quite well, given all that talk we've had about them being a new team, etc. But coming back after 2 wins in the beginning of the Swiss and finishing 6th is pretty solid.
Yep.
And Italy in 10th. I mean, for me, they've sneaked in there out of nowhere, really.
Yeah, I guess it's a good choice, actually. Italy definitely kind of snuck in kind of as like not necessarily the team that we anticipated, and they only lost one of their games, which
And
was to
only by 1
Australia.
point.
Yeah. So it's definitely something to consider in the future, is to keep an eye on Italy to see what they do next year.
Yep. Yep. 100%. And with that, I think we're going to wrap up what we're doing here. So, Nathan, thanks for the delightful collaboration.
I'm excited to do it
hosting
again
the
next
studio
year.
stream. Yeah, definitely. As long as they'll have us, hopefully. So,
Hopefully they'll keep having us. We'll keep coming as long as they keep having us, right?
Yep.
Yeah, this was amazing. It's great every year.
You're getting some love in the chat.
Jonathan DeLeo, if you bring me your thesis, I'll sign it for you. I will. I don't know why you'd want it, but I'll sign it for you. It's fair. It's hard to say goodbye, right, Joker, to a whole WTC season and spending all this time.
Yeah, it's been very intense. The preparations start anew. Team Sweden, I saw, have already picked a captain and a vice captain for the new selection. So
Jesus,
they're quick. They're not happy with that. They're not satisfied with that 4th place finish. And they're looking to come back stronger next year. Interesting stats. Interesting stuff. Why am I saying stats?
It's late there, Joker.
Definitely. It's definitely time to wrap it up. And
no, thank you for watching us, Gabby.
100%. So thank you to our sponsors, Weyland-Yutani, the Army Painter. Thank you to our patrons, our YouTube members, and thank you to all of the people that are listening to this and maybe are considering becoming patrons or members. That would be great, absolutely wonderful. But at the least, I'd like to ask you to like and subscribe what we do, as that also helps us grow.
Agreed. Everybody support contactlost. Hit that bell, hit that subscribe button. Go and watch some of the best 40K content that is currently being made.
And once you're done, don't forget about checking out StatCheck too.
Yeah, you can find us at stat-check.com, where you can find all of our singles data. Maybe one day we'll include some teams data, but for now, only singles. And one day we'll join the best format on the planet for our stats tracking purposes.
Yep, you better do that. See, there's room to grow for you guys too. Nice.
Exactly.
All right. Let's just finish there. I don't know what else to say. Thank you and bye bye. The studio
Bye-bye.
stream is out.
I'm not doing it again.
Not this year.